One African country may be joining the elite ranks of the Paris Club of Creditors soon. The Paris Club is a group of officials from major creditor countries whose role is to find coordinated and sustainable solutions to the payment difficulties experienced by debtor countries. We'll get into what this could mean not only for the African member, but also for the continent. We'll also look at the proposals being made in Zambia on how the country can address its debt risk. That and more on Business Edge today. I'm Tolulokwe Adila Balogun. Let's start with the African business headlines. Now, starting in East Africa, the Kenyan Treasury is seeking the creation of a tax court within the judiciary to speed up the settlement of disputes between taxpayers and the Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA. The Treasury wants to follow the U.S. model where the tax courts settle more than 90% of cases where the Federal Tax Service has issued a deficiency notice in which the government says individuals or businesses owe taxes. And staying in East Africa's largest economy, the price of wheat products in Kenya is anticipated to decrease in October as a result of millers placing orders for the product at a time when its price has dropped by 36% on international markets. The price of wheat on the international market dropped to 35,995 Kenyan shillings per ton last week from around 56,000 in March, when the price of the commodity reached a record high due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. According to millers, because there is typically a 3-month delay in shipment, the orders they are currently taking will be delivered at the port of Mombasa in October. And now to West Africa, where the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has warned that a shutdown of manufacturing activities is imminent if nothing is done to address the soaring cost of energy affecting the sector. MAN's Director General Segun Ajayi Kadri said that over the years, the manufacturing sector has been battered by numerous challenges which have reduced the number of industries in Nigeria and converted industrial hubs in the country to warehouses of imported goods or even event centers. The association is asking for a policy that would urgently allow companies and airlines to import diesel and aviation fuel from the Republic of Niger and Chad. As lines for PMS spread further across Nigeria, some filling stations in Lagos, Abuja, Niger, and other states have started selling from between 200 and 250 naira per liter. This is higher than the government-approved retail price of 165 naira per liter. It is believed that the Nigerian National Petroleum Company's inadequate supply of goods is to blame for the growing lines across the country. Flight prices, particularly on the busiest domestic routes between Johannesburg and Cape Town in South Africa, have spiked substantially following the collapse of Calm Air, which accounted for as much as 40% of the supply in the market. Airlines have been accused of price gouging from all quarters, but maybe unfairly so, as their pricing algorithms are based on demand. Fuel prices are at record highs, meaning that fares will also be structurally higher. This has seen prices for near-term flights from Joburg Cape Town route spiking to over 6,000 rand for a road trip. Or rather, a round trip, I beg your pardon, since we're going by air. Now, those are our headlines at this time. A quick time out, and when we get back, we're into our very first conversation. Stay with us. Now, the Paris Club, a group of officials from major creditor countries, has elevated South Africa's membership to prospective member status, putting it one step closer to becoming the first African country to completely enlist. This means that South Africa will take part in all Paris Club discussions and have the possibility of joining as the club's 23rd permanent member. The club, which was established in 1956 and consists of an informal gathering of largely wealthy Western nations that dominating financing to the developing world, has undergone another change as a result of South Africa's probable admission. Now, since China overtook the United States as the primary government creditor of the globe in the last 10 years, the club has grown to include developing nations like Brazil and South Korea. As international finance dries up due to rising interest rates in the developing world, the Paris Club is attempting to coordinate worldwide efforts to prevent a wave of debt default among poor nations. In the continent's effort to generate money for financially precarious nations still battling to recover from the coronavirus pandemic, South Africa has assumed a leadership position. Joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa is Isaac Matejo. He's senior economist at Nedbank. Isaac, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tolly. Thanks for inviting me.
So we're seeing what looks to be the first African member of the Paris Club on the way to becoming a full member of the Paris Club itself. But what do you think South Africa's interest is? This is not just a membership because you're present and maybe you fulfilled a number of years, but why would South Africa be really interested in joining as a full member of the Paris Club?
Well, South Africa should actually join with the objective of helping indebted African countries. As a country, South Africa is not highly indebted to the Paris Club creditors, but it will be quite important that the country joins as the first, I must say, of the African countries, because it's going to be critical that the other African countries are represented in the Paris Club going forward.
At South Africa joining now, in terms of gaining, you mentioned that the country is not heavily indebted as much as many other African countries are right now. Does South Africa gain anything? Does it gain anything even with its minimal debt considering the debts of other African nations? Will its membership also help the country in any way at all?
If I got your question well, my answer will be that South Africa has to consult the other African countries, not only the highly indebted countries, but also the ones, my apologies, we've got power supply problems here, so I could be I'm actually in the dark right now, but my point was, South Africa has to consult all African countries and be a voice for now for those countries until the other countries can also join, because it's quite important. I mean, if we can just look at what's happening with Zambia right now. Zambia is in negotiations with its external creditors, including the Paris Club members. So at a group level or the club level, it will be quite important to really, advance the interests of the African countries, not only because they are debtors, but there are many socio-economic issues that have to be tackled at a multilateral level.
Okay, and I like this place where you've taken the conversation now, because when you look at it in terms of expanding membership, the Paris Club has worked with many African countries in the past several years, but we hardly have been represented on the board, or at least at the highest level of decision making. So when it comes to this conversation, you're seeing South Africa's membership as an open door, the ability to bring in more African members down the line. But I'll go further, as you talked about in terms of negotiations and conversations. What does South Africa bring to the table as an African country? You also mentioned, of course, South Africa would need to talk to other African nations. So now it seems like South Africa is going to walk into that room representing African nations, being able to speak for them when it comes to these issues of negotiations and debts and creditors. So what do you think South Africa brings to the table?
Well, definitely, I haven't spoken to, for instance, the officials at the National Treasury, but I'm quite confident that they will join the club with the sole purpose of ensuring that the highly indebted African countries that need that rescheduling are given a fair deal. At the moment, the global macroeconomic environment is quite tough. Countries had to take on more debt to deal with the economic effects of COVID-19, and that really pushed the debt levels quite high. And then after that, when we were hoping that this situation was going to stabilize, and then become better. We saw the effects of the Russia-Ukraine war, and with many African countries being net importers of food products and, of course, fuel products, the impact has been so significant that many countries now are close to struggling with repaying their external creditors.
So when we look at that conversation in terms of the current macroeconomic situation of the world, which we're going to get to later on, you also have to ask, why has it taken so long for the possibility of a full African member to even come up? Do you want to try to touch on that? Because with its history of several decades of work, particularly with low income and developing economies, it has been involved with the African economy or the African nations for a number of years. Why have we taken so long for the Paris Club to get to this point where in 2022, 2023, South Africa could be its first African member?
Yeah, I will say that, it's quite disheartening that when it comes to global affairs, we see Africa being sort of the last to be given a seat at the table. You'll know that, it's taken so long for the World Bank, for instance, to be headed by an African, the former Nigerian finance minister. We know that African countries haven't had a strong word at the International Monetary Fund for quite a long time. So it's about time that, this treatment of Africa comes to an end, because we should be equal partners when it comes to global issues, particularly the economic issues that affect our people.
All right, Isaac, we're going to take a break. When we come back, you've mentioned Zambia. We'll look at that. Then we'll also look at the China Paris Club Africa sort of triangle that's going on as well. China is not a member of the Paris Club, but it is very, very active when it comes to African debt and the African creditor space. And we'll look at how that relationship is faring and what the consequences will be. Now, South Africa looks set to become the first African country to be a full-fledged member of the Paris Club. Don't know why it's taken this long, but it is, of course, progress. But in the meantime, how have African nations fared? And what's going to happen with Zambia, Chad, and Ethiopia, who are currently in the process of negotiating their debt? The conversation continues after this. The Paris Club provides debt treatments to debtor countries in the form of rescheduling, which is debt relief by postponement, or in the case of concessional rescheduling, reduction in debt service obligations during a defined period, the flow treatment, or as a set date, whether it's the stock treatment. And now South Africa will be sitting at the tables when these negotiations are happening. Fingers crossed. And that will happen in the next maybe 1 to 2 years in the next time. Now, still with me is Isaac Matejo. He's a senior economist at Nedbank as we look at South Africa joining the Paris Club. Now, the Paris Club has faced a lot of criticism in its time, particularly over a lack of transparency. So, Isaac, let's look at how African countries have fared in working with the Paris Club. We know, especially with the case in Nigeria, where former President Olusegun Obasanjo was able to clear the country's debt. What has been the general relationship between African countries and the Paris Club?
Well, I will say that the relationship has been reasonably fair in the sense that, countries could go to the Paris Club creditors and renegotiate the terms of their debts. But I have a worry that, or rather a concern that, these relationships have been used more to advance the interests of the creditors, particularly at global level or multilateral level, in the sense that, the debtor nations have in some way been compelled to, for instance, at the United Nations, vote in line with the wishes of the creditor nations. So I just hope that, with the African countries joining the Paris Club of creditors, while it should change to the Paris Club, because even debtors will be members now, it should change, the whole relationship should change to, move away from being a tool to advance the wishes of creditor nations across the globe.
All right. So, as you mentioned earlier, let's look at this Zambia, Chad, Ethiopia conversation. We know that the Paris Club is already negotiating the debts of these three countries, and all are due to meet sometime this month, amid some growing pressure also to accelerate this process around the debt restructuring, debt conversations that are happening. How do you think the negotiations will pan out? We'll be talking about Zambia in a number of minutes before the show wraps today, but let me get your thoughts on Zambia, Chad, and Ethiopia.
Sure. Definitely, Zambia needs a renegotiated debt structure because right now their foreign debt repayments are quite high. And if they had to meet all those payments every year, they would basically absorb almost more than half, actually, of the government's revenue. So there'd be no space really to spend in other important functions, for instance, social spending and also the development of infrastructure in the country and all that. So my hope is that Zambia will be able to secure a favorable debt structure after the negotiations, and China is going to be quite significant. You mentioned earlier that China is not a member of the Paris Club, so China's role hopefully will be fairer than what we've seen the Paris Club doing with the data nations.
So let's talk about that. So, given the fact that China is not a member of the Paris Club, but we know that right now it has sort of usurped the Paris Club's role. At a point in time, it was the Paris Club that previously was the sole institutional interlocutor of African states' debt. China has really moved beyond them in that conversation. So the differences between how both of them approach the African continent, how they approach African countries, do you think there will be consequences to the approach and how it plays out for African nations?
Yeah, I mean, the restructuring of Zambia's debt, for instance, is being done. The negotiations, at least, are under the terms of the Group of 20's new debt treatment arrangement that was concluded in 2020 in response to the shock coming from COVID-19. So basically, the terms are that, all creditors have to extend debt relief under similar terms. So, I mean, Zambia is the guinea pig when it comes to this. So what we get out of Zambia is going to be quite important for all the other African countries, those that want to renegotiate their debts. Hence, I'm quite hopeful that the deal that Zambia is going to secure will be quite favorable because if it is not and it gets extended to the other African countries, it could be really bad news for the continent as a whole.
So let me follow up on that because given the fact that it seems China has become Africa's first bilateral creditor now, moving aside the Paris Club, the IMF, and the World Bank, we have these conversations. And we know with the Zambia situation, they were unable to move forward until China came to the table and agreed to be part of the conversation. So when you look at the further implications for countries that have Chinese financial assistance, what do you think there will be beyond Zambia, beyond even whether or not South Africa is part of the conversations as a member of the Paris Club or not?
Yeah, I mean, direct negotiations with China are quite important because, as you allude to, China is now the leading bilateral foreign trader, rather creditor to African countries. And China has got to come to the table with very fair terms. And that's what's got to happen because that is going to affect the other highly indebted countries, such as Ethiopia. We could add Kenya to some extent, and those terms are going to have to be very, very critical to ensure the sustainability of government finances across sub-Saharan Africa.
And this leads me to my last question. Now, the International Monetary Fund has projected that the continent will likely face a financing gap of some $219 billion by 2023. We've also seen the bond markets react. We're losing a lot of international investors and they're leaving the African bond market to us. And that's going to, of course, put us into a lot of trouble. But we did see the Paris Club and the G20 work on an agreement in April 2020 to also get a pause in debt servicing. So beyond that, what kind of relationship should we be looking at for the Paris Club and Africa in the coming years, especially as we continue to try to get out from under COVID and now the implications of the Russia-Ukraine crisis?
I mean, it had to take the shock of COVID for the multilateral agencies to really appreciate the fact that the debtor countries have got to be brought to the table and their word has got to be taken heed of, because those are the people who are really feeling the pain, because, it's unlike the 80s when, for instance, we saw that Latin American debt default, when the creditor institutions didn't really pay any attention, or rather didn't care a lot about what those nations were doing, particularly the social conditions in those countries. Now it is quite encouraging that the multilateral institutions are paying attention to these issues, because going forward, it will mean a better relationship between the creditors and the debtors, and that can only be good, for geopolitical issues.
All right, so Isaac Matejo, we'll stop the conversation here, but we know that it's going to be a continuous one, especially around the debt. And then when South Africa, of course, becomes a member, we'll look at how that will, of course, walk things forward. But thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. And of course, as he said, at the end of the day, the bilateral creditors in the world must take the African conversation quite seriously, because with COVID-19, we entered the first recession that the continent experienced in 25 years. And then the Russia-Ukraine crisis has made things much more difficult. With a hike in interest rates around the world, we are definitely feeling the pinch. There's more to come on Business Edge. Lekan Onabanjo is standing by after this break with international business news.